Welcome to HortTube. My name is John Putnam. In this video, we're going to show off some plants that we've started collecting already for the upcoming 2025 gardening season here. It's the middle of February. We've got some native plants for the native garden over there, and then some other plants that we've collected out in, when we did the trip out to San Diego to a Verde. We have a few of those plants. We have some garden center that was in the process of moving here in Raleigh, had some things discounted the other day, got a few things there. We're just kind of equal opportunity plant folks. We had a friend, this is an interesting one, the first one I'll talk about. I think I'll cover maybe 10 in this video, and then we'll point out a few more in upcoming videos, because we have quite the collection and more coming. One of the things what is kind of funny is this is a Goshiki osmanthus, and I've probably had this plant on an individual plant video a couple times over the years, and then in other groupings of like small screening plant video or something like that. I've just covered Goshiki quite a lot, but we've never had one here in our garden. And it's such a great osmanthus. It's slightly more cold hardy than we would consider osmanthus fragrans, which is like zone 7 to 10 or 7B to 10. This one is actually hardy in zone 6 to 9. Has a little different look to it. It looks really, really prickly. You can see what looks like really tough spines on this, but they're not at all. I mean, you could figure out a way to hurt yourself in here, I would imagine, but it's really kind of a false holly. It looks like a holly, it looks super spiny, but it's just not too bad. Goshiki, this variety, means 5 colors in Japanese, and you'll know why when it starts to leaf out in the spring. When it gets new growth on it, it's kind of reddish, a little bit of pink hue, and then some red, and then it settles into a creamy white and green variegation, and ultimately a little bit of a chartreuse color. So there's a lot of colors, a lot of color changing happening on this plant. If left alone, there's one at the Ralston that's probably 7 feet tall now, and it's about 4 feet wide. I don't think it's really ever been pruned on, and it does flower. It takes a longer for these to flower. They have to get the great fragrant flowers on them that other osmanthus do. But again, when I was a nurseryman growing these, and I pointed this out one time, I think in the 15 years I grew these, I had never seen flowers on juvenile plants in the nursery. And then, you know, seeing them more established, older plants, sometime during the winter, sometime during the late fall, winter, early spring is when they will, is when they'll flower. Of course, it could be kept as a much smaller plant than that. You can prune it off. And I think if you get a tag on Goshiki osmanthus, it's probably going to say 3 to 4 feet in height or 3 to 5 feet in height. It will get taller than that, like other woody shrubs. This is just a great addition. And a funny story is, I had a friend call me. He was at a nursery down in the eastern part of the state several months back, and said, I'm at a nursery. They've got a few things that are interesting. Do you guys have a Goshiki osmanthus? Goshiki osmanthus, and I said, I actually don't. And he said, well, I'll pick you up one. And then he took it home, and then they had massive flooding from a tropical storm that came in, and apparently my Goshiki osmanthus floated away to somebody else. So somebody else has that Goshiki osmanthus. So we bought one this week from a garden center here in Raleigh. It's a 1 gallon. We may put this one. This is actually a pretty good container plant for us that we can use here in zone 8. Of course, it can just be a low foundation plant, corner foundation plant. Just an easy, super easy plant, kind of slow growing. You know, these variegated things will grow a little slower than some other things in the ground overall. So if you're trying to use it as a corner foundation thing or something, you'd probably want to buy one larger than a 1 gallon to get started. Otherwise, it's going to be like a decade before this thing gets 4 or 5 feet tall. Here's a plant we got down at Superior Plants, which is just starting to bloom. This is an Ogon spirea, and I grew this one at my nursery for a long time. I think this is really kind of underused spirea. There's tons of spireas that are available to us, bridal wreath spireas and lower growing spireas, and ones with interesting foliage colors and flowers and all kinds of things. But I always thought Ogon was a little underused. This one's hardy in zone 4 to 8. I will say in zone 4, 5, 6, this is definitely full sun, full sun, full sun. It has a chartreuse kind of coloration to the leaves when the leaves are fully out. And in zone 8 here where we are, it will lose some of that to the, you know, if it gets kind of bleached in the full sun in the afternoon. So here where we are, I'll put it in an area that's going to get plenty of sun to keep it chartreuse, but not enough to it actually just bleaches it away. So that there's a kind of a delicate balance there. This one's kind of got a larger weeping habit, so it'll get maybe 4 to 5 feet by 4 to 5 feet, something like that, kind of a cascading habit as it gets larger. I would say that for folks in zones 4, 5, 6, it's a mid-spring flowering shrub. Here in zone 7 or 8, it's going to be late winter, when this thing is coming into flower. Nice little structure to it, easy plant to grow, and it adds that little pop of gold coloration in the garden. And anytime, it's so funny because I grew this plant for 2 decades at the nursery, and we'd sell a few here and sell a few there when the color's really good on it, and it tends to bloom too early here for us to sell it in flower because it's just before the garden center traffic started. And then we'd sell it on that foliage color maybe in the early spring, and then they'd sit there the rest of the season and not sell. And then we go to various gardens and see it in the garden and go, wow, man, that plant should just be used more. It is a deciduous plant, and lots of folks here in the deeper south, tend to just lean all in on, leafy evergreen things that stay evergreen. But this nice little cascading habit actually looks great in the wintertime. So that's Ogon spirea. We also picked up another Alyssium down at Jason's place, and this gives us 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, that little one right there. This would be 7, right? Seven Alyssium here in the garden. A couple of them are Asian species. Most of them are native species, though this one is as well. This is Alyssium floridanum. This one's called Halley's Comet. Gets a pretty big maroon color, star-shaped flower on it, alien-looking flowers on these. You can have flowers on these from March all the way until fall, with kind of a peak in the spring. The foliage is super pungent, fragrant. It's not a bad smell at all, but makes it deer resistant in the garden. I like to say deer resistant. Probably pretty deer proof, but I say deer resistant just because it's from the wetter areas down around the Gulf, but works well in our ornamental gardens. We have our Alyssium floridanum back there. Probably the first 2 years it was in the ground, we thought it could not live in that dry area back there because it was wilted every single afternoon, But then the sun would go down and it would perk back up, and it ultimately is thriving back there, absolutely thriving. So we're going to put it over here in the native garden in what will be slightly more wet condition than that. The other one is, but not as, but still not wet. But they adapt. In time, it'll adapt just fine. Beautiful foliage. You can expect these to be 6 to 8 feet in height and 4 to 5 feet in width, probably in 5 or 6 years, something like that. Hardy in zone 7 to 9, possibly 6B to 9 in a slightly protected space. But we do love Alyssium for their pest resistance and great native shrubs, and such interesting flowers on them as well. But every single Alyssium we have in the backdrop of anything in this garden, when they show up, everybody's like, what is that? What is that? But so this is going to be a great understory plant. Was where we would put it, in a slightly moist place. This is the perfect plant for that. Next up is this Cephlanthus, or buttonbush. There's some buttonbush breeding going on right now, which is kind of interesting, where we're seeing more compact ones and probably better overall ornamental plants. And we've also, if you've followed the channel long enough, we were up in Chicago and did the video with Kim up there, and she has she's collected these from the southeast. These typically grow in very wet spaces, over to the southwest, and had an entire breeding program where she was going to be crossing possibly some of the ones that would take drier conditions with some of our southeastern ones to, hopefully be able to put them in ornamental gardens where it doesn't have to stay wet or has to stay constantly moist. But these have these crazy alien flowers on them, and the first time you ever see the Cephlanthus in bloom, you will have seen something that you haven't seen before. And Steph and I, we spend a lot of time hiking and spending a lot of time in the southeast United States, and we run across Cephlanthus in the wild quite a bit. One time down in Florida at a park near St. Augustine, And it was growing right in the middle of this swamp area and in full bloom, great looking plant, and looked out there, and it was like a hatchery for alligators. There were all these tiny alligators swimming around this one plant. I was like, well, that was one we weren't going to approach. Anyway, so we've seen this plant a few times on the channel over the years. It does need a slightly wetter, more moist. It needs a continual moist spot, and so down here in this new native garden, we'll get, put it in a space that can stay a little bit more moist than other things, and I may not elevate it quite as much as I elevate other things out here, but we definitely have wanted one. And again, this one's going to get 10 feet tall probably if we just let it, and it has space and room. We typically don't see them like that in the wild, but if it has space and room in an ornamental space and it's happy, these can get quite big. And again, so there is some breeding going on in Cephalanthus to make them, again, more compact, more just better ornamental plants overall. But we're excited to have one, and it's one of, and like Steph said right before we turned on the camera here, when you see this for the first time, you're like, what in the alien, it's an alien thing happening. Maybe at Denny Werner's house when we filmed over there, he had them, and I don't remember if it was in flower at the time. I don't remember if it ended up on video or not in the Denny Werner videos where we did his beautiful perennial border, where we shot content over there with Denny. Cephalanthus may be in that video as well. They're hardy in zone 5 to 9, so most everybody watching can grow this. You're just going to need an area that's just not dry. It needs to be where you can keep some consistent moisture on it. We went up to the pine knot sale on Friday and grabbed a few hellebores and a clematis that I'll tell you about in a minute, a ruscus, which we haven't had a ruscus in the garden. We got a couple ferns as well. This is a lady fern. This spot that's to the right of me in the summertime is actually quite sunny and hot, very, very hot. But it tends to be overall the most moist conditions in the garden on a year-round basis, and it's very, very shady in the wintertime over here. But we haven't been able to, it's hard to find consistency in that little space in the garden where it's super, super sunny in the summertime and then dark in the wintertime sometimes. But we've got this palm up high enough now and a few things over here that we can come in here now and plug in a few understory plants in this slightly more moist spot over here that will be shaded even during the summertime. So that's my point here, is that Vitex and other things will help regulate the light over there a bit better on a year-round basis now. And so we're going to put this lady fern will go over there. This one will get maybe 2 feet by 2 feet. This particular variety is called Limelight, and when it's coming out, 18 to 24 inches, something like that, by 18 to 24 inches. When it's coming out in the spring, has kind of a lime green color and a red stem on it. It settles into green over time, but it has this really interesting new foliage on it during the growing season when it's actively growing in the spring. And we've got great places. We've gone from no places for ferns to really a nice little 20 by 20 space over here that's kind of consistently moist. One other we got is this hart's tongue fern. This one actually prefers alkaline soil. It's native to places, very low light places with rocky outcroppings and that kind of thing. So it tends to like alkaline spaces. And I actually have a place over here that's with some mortared concrete spot where the water bib is back here, and it stays moist, so it'll have moisture and it will, I think the pH is a little bit higher over there because of that lime that's in that mortar and that concrete that's around the corner over there. So we'll get this one in the ground, and it's a perfect little plant, and we're putting, we're assigning a plant to, the space that we think it will match up, and we've gained some spaces over time. Now that we've got some additional shade, that we've built up all this organic material out here, there's some slightly changing spaces that will allow us to add some other interesting things. Picked up a small butcher's broom, or ruscus. This is a plant that will tolerate dry shade, and we're always looking for things that will tolerate. That back line back here in the garden is a dry, shady space, and not a lot of things will tolerate that. When you enter at the Ralston from the main road and go through the little the J.C. Ralston little entryway with the gate and everything, you'll notice ruscus on the left and the right in a dry shade space under some live oaks. It's a little hilly little space too, up above a retaining wall. Super, super dry, and the ruscus does fantastic there. There are quite a few of these. There's some named ones, other ones we'll show off in the future. But interesting plant. It can be a little, if you figure out how, it's got a very pointy leaf on it that can definitely stay. It's not one to grab a hold of. It's not user friendly necessarily if you're trying to hug it. These can be cut to the ground in the late winter to rejuvenate them if you need to, or you can selectively prune stems back to the ground if you wanted to. Gets a really decorative red berry on it in the winter time, which is, again, highly decorative in a shady space during the winter time when not a lot of other things are showing off. But I don't know if we've ever talked about butcher's broom, and it's in just tons of shade gardens here around the city. So we're trying to add some things that we just haven't talked about much over the years, and we'll just watch this thing grow from a tiny little pint pot over the years back here in our shade garden. Weirdly, we've been pulling mondo grass out of this garden since we started this project, and some liriope too, some liriope spicata, the spreading liriope. But Steph really loves this little dwarf mondo, this dwarf variegated mondo. And we saw this, we put up a mondo grass video on the channel, dwarf mondo grass video on the channel a couple weeks ago. And while we were there, we saw this variegated one. This is great for, tucking in. I could put it in this patio out here between the stones in the patio. I could put it, any place I wanted, just a small little grass that just hopefully outcompete the weeds in an area that's, part shade or shady. Great in a container, pretty much any place you want to use this. This variegated one is going to be in no hurry. And even the regular dwarf mondo is in no hurry. This will be in even less of a hurry, so I don't have to worry about it taking over any kind of space. I can definitely dig this out faster than it can grow, for sure. If you find one in a container like this that's got, I can look in here and see that I could probably divide this into 3 easily, probably 10 if I was going to be greedy, but 3 easily. And I could put them around a container or something like that, but really not invasive in any way, and really, really interesting with that variegation. We did come back with some more hellebores from the hellebore sale up at Pine Knot, and I think there's 2 more weekends for that sale if you're watching this. It's up on the Virginia, North Carolina border, on the Virginia side in Clarksville, Virginia. We'll talk about those hellebores when they go in the ground pretty soon, and got another epimedium from them. Lots of other things here we're going to talk about, and I'm going to close this out with a couple for this video. This is an evergreen clematis armandii. I recommend these quite a bit in consultations because folks have, looking for an evergreen vine, and this one, to me, it does flower, and it flowers heavily, and they're fragrant, smell like kind of an almond scent to them. Just when it's in, this variety is called Snowdrift, which is a white flowering one. There's also a pink flowering one as well, but the white just really, really shows up. So I'm not going to talk down the flowers. The flowers are amazing, they're fragrant, they're everything. They're early spring and they last for a short period of time. But then the texture of this vine takes over. The leaf is just, it's unbelievable how nice this vine is, and it tends to hang down where it'll come, where you can plant this and you can put it across the top of a fence. And I've seen some folks put like a wire, maybe 2-3 feet above the fence, and actually grow the main stem on the top fence, and then it'll hang down little branches, from that. We saw it we did a walk around the neighborhood video last year and saw this beautiful clematis armandii over here near us, if you remember that. It was in bloom at the time. These can bloom early enough here for us that sometimes frost can do a little number on them, and they'll get a few residual flowers after that. Just like any other clematis, it would like its root shaded and the top up in the sun. So you can, planting it near a base of a fence, or planting it. This is one of the few plants I tell you can plant a little bit deeper in the ground and get away with it, just to kind of keep the roots cool on them. Just really a great plant. And I'm growing this thing for the leaf texture as much as I am the flowers. And again, flowers are great. It just completely covers up in white fragrant flowers on the Snowdrift variety. It'll grow 15 to 30 feet long, just like any other vine. You probably want to limit the length of that out at some point and occasionally cut it, and that'll force some new growth down in the inside of it and keep it slightly fuller. If you let it get way over there, the back at the beginning of the plant will end up kind of thin and bare if you're not kind of forcing some new growth back in the center of it occasionally. That's about, you know, maintenance on vines can be, you know, they don't require like a lot of ongoing maintenance, but when they need maintenance, they need maintenance. When this thing comes in, when this thing flowers in the spring and then starts growing, you need to be out there, you know, as it's putting on that rapid spring growth, winding it where you want it to go, making sure it's going where you want. Otherwise, it just becomes a giant pile and doesn't end up vining on the thing that you want it to vine on. So that's that Clematis armandii. I don't have any idea where we're gonna put it. We've got some fence space over here. We could put it on the building over there. We could put it over the door here. I could put it on the front fence out there. I don't know. I have no idea yet, but we saw it and it was looking great and the price was right. So sometimes you figure it out later, right? Last plant I'm gonna show in this video, and then again, there's gonna be another one a little bit later. We've got some other things coming. We have an ultra rare plant coming up in the next video that's grafted, wasn't taken out of the wild, but it's endangered in the wild. So be prepared for that video to go up. But we did, while we were down at Jason's, get a baby blue ice Chamaecyparis. This is, if you got to go back and watch this video. I'm not going to tell you a whole lot about this plant. I put this video up. I'm going to link it right here at the end of the video. And you can see Steph was trying to run away with it while we were shooting that video, but then we didn't end up taking one. And we were back down at Superior Plants the other day and grabbed one while we were there. It's just you'll learn more about it in that video. How about that? It's linked right here at the end of this video. Thanks for watching.